Greetings, bloggers, vloggers, followers, and potters. Dustin here from Dustin's Dynasty, here at you again with another edition of this week's vlog. This week, we continue things that start with S for September. We've done a couple of those this month. We've done about suicide prevention. We've done about stimming last week, and we're going to conclude this month's series, as far as I know, with social pragmatics. And we may continue into this next month. I am not certain as of this moment, but uh, for tonight, we're going to talk about social pragmatics. And this topic was sort of inspired, although it's always been something that has been on the back burner of mine, but it never really came to heart until yesterday when I listened to the Not Your Average Autism Mom podcast. Sharon Archiola is a great woman and raises an adult son with autism. And she was also on News Nation Now this week. And she had an awesome thing to say. I missed all the discourse in our country, all the talk about autism in this country this week. So, but regardless, the podcast that she did was amazing, and it covered all the bases that is about, what social pragmatics are. However, I would like to use my podcast as a way to transform social pragmatics into a way of how I became a person who spoke very little to anybody outside my safe circle of friends almost 20 or even 10 years ago, to who I speak to, and how fluent I am today at the age of 40. So if you haven't been following me for a while, my name is Dustin. I'm autistic. I'm 40 years old. I've been doing this autism thing for at least over 25 years. Although there's been inclination that it's been more. I have a part-time job. I have that for over 15 years, and it does involve interacting with others and, using my voice and talking and to get the work done. And also, I have been living independently for over 7 years. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So what are social pragmatics? Well, these are things like literal thinking. And there's a good gentleman, a young autistic man about my age or so, that writes a good book. His name is Brent Anderson. I was privileged to talk to him I was not talk to him, but join a webinar sponsored by one of our healthcare quality units here in our state for Autism Awareness Acceptance Month this April. And as such, I was privileged to get a copy of the book. I will put the link to the book on the show notes and his website. So that's just one thing. There are many other things. Saying factual things when sometimes you don't need to say them because maybe literal thinking, uh, contradict comes in play, and maybe somebody exaggerates, and when you're saying something that's factual, because even though it's not said by somebody else who is maybe not autistic or neurotypical, the neurodivergent or autistic person will say the literal thing and the factual thing. Sometimes autistic people have problems with turn taking. I did for a long time, but eventually learned, how to handle that in a good, healthy way. There's also other things like interrupting others. Sometimes we're so focused, or we want to get our point across so fast that we don't stop and think before we speak the spoken words. Um, Sometimes we don't choose the appropriate words for the appropriate situation that we're in. And I have been very blessed at a very young teenage age to learn what is appropriate and what is not. Although there have been times when it has not been appropriate in my adult life, I learned from my mistakes, and I've bounced back from the fumble and adversity and move on. Sometimes we have nonverbal cues, and that could be, things that we don't see or we don't understand like facial expressions or other cues that may not be well understood. Um, other things and also inside jokes. Sometimes it's hard to understand what some things really mean, or just what's in between a couple people, or what's just small talk or just fun talk. It's hard, and all of these things can be hard and barriers and ways to make friends or understand how it comes together and how it works. And as time did evolve within, I'd say, the past 10 years, I had learned how to use more of a social outlet, such as my day services, for example, or maybe a few other friends I met here and there to build friendships and such. Um, so moving forward, how do, how does that work, and how did I get to where I am? Well, there are some things that help with that. And I think some of those things, because I have other co-occurring conditions like, anxiety and bipolar disorder in the mix, one of the biggest things I realized since having two relapses in the past 2 years was medication is a big tool in helping with that and helping keep things, calm and slow my speech and slow my mind and keep all those neuroreceptors up in my brain uh, at a speed and connecting in the way that they need to be connected. For the longest time, I didn't understand that, and the first relapse I took did a very bad decision. The second relapse, I did something that I'd always done, but I had done it for an extended period of time, and then I finally learned that you need combinations and the right cocktail for things to work. And these were things that worked all along. And although it had been a struggle for 6 of the 7 years that I had been living independently, we're finally being more grounded where we understand things and we're doing better because of it. Some of the other ways I understood social pragmatics was by experience, whether that was a counselor, a peer, a worker, and that worked with me in the community, or maybe my therapist, who has also been a big help, or just my family and their friends, or other people that I would meet in different social situations that I would go in. And sometimes, it wasn't perfect. And any situation that I was in, there were mistakes. And sometimes there were mistakes. And indeed, it was what it was. It wasn't perfect. Sure, I beat myself up over it, but again, I learned trial and error, and eventually I learned to pick myself up and move on and learn from those mistakes that I had so I could continue to do better going forward and use those mistakes that I had as a learning experience and know not to do it X, Y, and Z way. Sometimes, one of the biggest things I think that had helped me was, I had had speech therapy through all of my public school and maybe even before at some point. But I do know, as far as I can recollect, I did have it in public school in many forms. While in elementary school, I did work on many ways of how to learn how to use my speech properly. After junior high, when I went to senior high, it more so worked in social pragmatics like turn taking, talking, learning how to connect with peers, so on and so forth. And I had that till the end of the school year of my senior year. So, and I commend that the speech therapist for putting that into play and for being as dedicated as they were and being there as long as they were to do it because they were phenomenal at that. That was a big thing and it really helped me. So here are some ways that can help and how they have helped me. So, like I said, speech therapy, I had it all through my public education, but what was the turning point is starting to open that social pragmatic dialogue was having goals for social pragmatics and working on them. Each week when I had therapy, a speech therapy, in that little room at the end of the hallway. We went into that little room, and there may have been two or three of us, and we had a computer, and we would play games. And it may seem little, and maybe maybe we did have a pop or two, or a soda pop, and but we learned how to make those social connections with my peers. Some of them I had known a very long time, but got to know on a little more personal. And likewise, those skills that I had learned in that speech therapy every week, as those 3 last years of my senior high school, was able to be transferred in many other parts of my educational experience there. And because I was out of the classroom the last 2 years more, I was able to be more integrated or included in more things and do more things. So another thing, and I've never really had the opportunity to do this because of being the age that I am, but social skills groups are also a big part of that. It can be through ABA, it can be through any kind of wraparound therapy. Locally here, we have them. Um, but they are beneficial in their own way. Sometimes it's just if the individual has family and their friends and acquaintances that know each other very well and accept the individual for who they are, then you work on those skills. You do that small talk. You do maybe you call that friend have them call that friend on the cell phone on the way to their house. And I remember I did that for the first time 20 years ago, and I was mortified at calling my dad's friend on the phone, but I did it. And you know what? Our relationship got better until, they were no longer around. And it worked not just with that friend, but it worked with several of my father's friends as time went on, and my mother's too. And then, as I had went into, my weight loss support group, my day services, my employment, things had gotten better. So that leads into our next part in real life. As you go out and about in the world, if you can, maybe you're going to, the dollar store or the Walmart or, the fast food joint, or maybe even just keep working at calling a pizza joint or a takeout joint at a location and maybe making that telephone order on the phone and having grace when it happens, and maybe if it doesn't go perfect or if it doesn't understand. I remember particularly one instance where I called into a Chinese restaurant with my sister, and because there was a little bit of misunderstanding between the cultured voice, that I was a little snippy at the end. And sometimes that is a challenge when you have to do things. And sometimes, things like that, like cold calling people and having to call people can be a challenge for us on the spectrum. And eventually, because of my line of work, I eventually had to learn how to accept that and make that a part of what I have to do, and that it is a part of my job, and I have to make it what it is. Through all the skills that I had acquired over the past 10, 15 years before, I was able to do that part of the job with much success. Again, model and that's a big thing. And explaining things. I think, we explain we if things are explained to us as autistic people in the way that we can, and we know the when, where, what, and why of something, then yes, by all means, it should work out better for you. And then things can maybe get acquired in that brain, and then it can be processed as slow or as best as it can. Again, explain that figurative language and explain, how does that work, and what does it really mean, and what doesn't it mean? And Brain Anderson's book explains that quite well. And I will again share those links in the notes of these videos. Um, you know, Model and narrate. I can't say that enough. I just said it again, but again, do that. And nowadays, now we didn't have social stories, narrative scripts. But for me, as I evolve into living independently, growing up, maturing, going out in public more, those are things that have helped me. In fact, last year when I had went to a new dentist that I had not been at very much. I had, had a filling done for cavities, and through that, I had to go on the web and search for because I hadn't done many years ago, but I had to go through the web and I found one, and as such, our state autism collaborative made a bunch of social stories this year. So I think, it works and it's doing well. And, things are just being better all the time. Just in closing, you're going to do all these things maybe, or you're going to do things slow at a time. But remember, slow down and, remember these things take time, mistakes happen. We're all human. We're not all perfect. They're going to be the way that they're going to be. So, just take it slow and do what you can. So, again, I'm going to close this weekend. Thank you for listening. Thank you for the new subscribers. I keep seeing them come in, at least on YouTube. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, and tap that notification bell. Lastly, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, X, and Pinterest. That handle is Dustin's Dynasty. I'm on the internet. My website is www.dustinsdynastyusa.com. And lastly, I have a link tree that has all my links to everything that you need to know about my platforms, my my podcasting platforms, my socials, all my website, my email. That handle is Dustin's Dynasty under Linktree. Again, I want to thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Have a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.